My mother-in-law rode a horse down the aisle in a white dress at my own wedding and made it all about herself. So I made sure she'll never forget it. I planned my wedding for 14 months. Every detail was intentional. Every choice was meaningful. My fiancé Holt and I wanted something elegant but personal. We chose an outdoor venue at a vineyard with rolling hills and a long pathway where the bridal party would walk before the ceremony. The entourage was supposed to be simple. Bridesmaids in soft pink dresses walking in pairs. Groomsmen in classic gray suits. Flower girls scattering petals. Then me, walking alone because my father passed years ago and I wanted to honor that absence rather than replace him. It was all planned down to the minute. Then Holt's mother Judith decided to add herself to the program. Judith had been difficult from the moment Holt introduced us. She made comments about my career being too demanding for a wife. She criticized my cooking when I hosted dinners. She suggested I change my hairstyle, my wardrobe, my opinions on everything. She told Holt privately that he could do better, but since he was set on me, she would tolerate the situation. Tolerate. Like I was a condition she had to endure, rather than a person her son loved. During the wedding planning, Judith inserted herself into every decision. She wanted to change the venue to somewhere more prestigious. She wanted to invite 60 people I'd never met because they were important to her social circle. She wanted the bridesmaids in a different color because pink washed her out in photos. When I politely declined her suggestions, she complained to Holt that I was excluding her. He defended me, but she kept pushing. The entourage issue came up 3 months before the wedding. Judith announced she wanted to be part of the processional. I told her we had assigned roles for family members and she was welcome to do a reading during the ceremony instead. She said readings were boring and nobody remembered them. She said she deserved a visible role since she was the mother of the groom. I said traditionally the mother of the groom is seated before the processional begins. She said tradition was outdated and I was being rigid. I stood firm. The entourage would be the bridal party, the flower girls, and me. Parents would be seated. End of discussion. Judith seemed to accept this. She stopped bringing it up. She even complimented the final program when we sent it to family. I thought we had reached an understanding. I was very wrong. The wedding day arrived and everything started beautifully. The bridesmaids followed in their soft pink dresses. The flower girls scattered petals perfectly. Then it was supposed to be my turn. Instead, I heard gasps from the guests. My maid of honor rushed back to me with wide eyes. She said Judith was on the pathway, with a horse. I didn't understand at first. I asked her to repeat it. She said Judith had appeared from the side of the venue riding a white horse in a cream-colored gown that looked almost bridal. She was slowly making her way down the entire pathway, while guests watched in stunned silence. Judith had hired the horse without telling anyone. She'd arranged for someone to bring it to the venue secretly. She'd timed her entrance to happen right before mine so every eye would be on her. She wanted to steal my moment, and she'd succeeded. By the time I walked down that pathway, guests had already witnessed the spectacle of my mother-in-law on horseback, in a dress that bordered on white. Some people were still whispering about it. Some were trying not to laugh. My entrance felt like an afterthought to the circus that preceded it. The ceremony happened. I said my vows and meant every word. Holt looked horrified about what his mother had done. He mouthed sorry to me twice during the readings, but the damage was done. My walk down the aisle would forever be overshadowed by Judith's horse parade. At the reception, Judith acted like nothing unusual had happened. She smiled and accepted compliments on her dramatic entrance. She told people she wanted to honor the historic vineyard setting with something memorable. She said the bride didn't mind because they had discussed it beforehand. I didn't want to cause a scene on my wedding day. I smiled and danced and cut the cake and pretended everything was perfect. But I was already planning. The next major family event was Judith's 60th birthday party 2 months later. She had been planning it for a year. She rented a ballroom and invited 200 people. She had a specific vision for how the evening would unfold. There would be a grand entrance where she descended a staircase while her favorite song played. Everyone would watch her make her way down, and then applause would follow. She talked about this entrance constantly. It was going to be her moment. I offered to help with some of the party logistics. Judith was surprised but pleased. She thought I was finally accepting my place in her family. She gave me a list of small tasks, including coordinating with the DJ about timing for her entrance. I coordinated perfectly, just not the way she expected. Meeting Leonardo the DJ had been surprisingly easy. When I called to go over the timing details, I mentioned I was the bride from the vineyard wedding where his mother-in-law rode a horse down the aisle. He remembered it immediately and laughed in disbelief. I told him I was handling coordination for Judith's party and had a proposal. $300 cash, and he would switch the song at a specific moment during her entrance. Leonardo was quiet for a moment before saying he'd do it for $200, just because the horse story was so outrageous. We met at a coffee shop the week before the party to finalize the details, and I handed him the cash in an envelope. On the night of the party, Judith positioned herself at the top of the staircase. The DJ announced her. The music began. She started her descent with a practiced smile and careful steps. Halfway down, the music changed. The song switched from Judith's elegant classical piece to something cheerful and bouncy with lyrics about someone who always needs to be the center of attention. I stood near the DJ booth watching her face freeze halfway down those stairs. Her practiced smile turned stiff and fake as she tried to figure out what was happening. The 200 guests went quiet for a second before someone started laughing. Then more people joined in with nervous giggles and confused whispers. Judith kept walking down those stairs, but her whole body looked tense and wrong. The song kept playing with its silly lyrics about people who make everything about themselves. Some guests were covering their mouths, trying not to laugh out loud. Others looked embarrassed for her. A few pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Judith reached the bottom of the staircase with that frozen smile still on her face and her cheeks bright red. My heart was racing, but I felt good watching her moment get ruined just like she ruined mine. Then the fear kicked in because I knew she would figure out someone did this on purpose. Judith grabbed the party coordinator by the arm the second she reached the floor. Her face was red and angry as she pulled him and Leonardo into a corner. I stayed back in the crowd pretending to look at my phone. I could see her mouth moving fast and her hands waving around. Leonardo kept shaking his head and pointing at his equipment. The coordinator looked stressed and kept apologizing. Leonardo was playing his part perfectly, acting like he had no idea what went wrong with the sound system. He kept pointing at different buttons and wires like he was trying to figure out the problem. Judith's voice got louder and I heard her say something about this being deliberate. People around me were still whispering about what happened. Some thought it was funny. Others felt bad for her. A woman next to me said maybe it was a sign from the universe. I wanted to laugh but kept my face normal. The party coordinator finally walked away looking defeated while Judith kept talking to Leonardo. Her whole grand entrance was destroyed, and everyone would remember the wrong song instead of her perfect moment. Holt found me 20 minutes later standing by the dessert table. He looked upset and confused in a way that made my stomach hurt. He asked if I knew anything about the music problem since I helped set things up with the DJ. I told him technical issues happen at parties all the time, and I had no idea what went wrong. My voice sounded calm even though my hands were shaking. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he wasn't totally sure. He said his mother was really upset and thought someone sabotaged her entrance on purpose. I asked why anyone would do that and tried to look surprised. Holt said he didn't know, but Judith was devastated because this party meant so much to her. He mentioned how much planning she put into everything. I felt a little bit guilty hearing the sadness in his voice. Then I remembered her riding that horse down my wedding aisle in a white dress, and the guilt went away. I told Holt his mom would feel better once the party got going and people stopped talking about the music. He squeezed my hand and said he hoped so. We stood there quiet for a minute before he went back to check on Judith. I watched him walk away and wondered how long I could keep lying to him. The next morning, my phone rang early, and I saw it was Holt calling from the other room. I could hear his voice through the walls talking to someone. When he came into the kitchen, his face looked tired and stressed. He said his mother called crying about the party being ruined. She told him someone deliberately messed up her entrance and destroyed her special moment. Holt tried to calm her down on the phone, but she kept insisting it was planned. I poured coffee with my back to him so he couldn't see my face. He said he told Judith it was probably just an accident with the sound equipment. She wasn't buying it, though. She kept saying the timing was too perfect, and someone wanted to embarrass her. Then Holt said the part that made my stomach drop. Judith suspected me because I was the one who helped coordinate with the DJ. My hand shook and I spilled some coffee on the counter. I asked why she would think that and tried to sound shocked. Holt said his mother remembered how I offered to help with the party planning, which wasn't like me. She thought maybe I was getting revenge for the wedding thing. I turned around and looked at him straight in the eyes. I said I would never do something that mean, and I was just trying to be helpful. Holt watched my face for a few seconds before nodding. He said he told his mother the same thing, but she wasn't letting it go. I asked what that meant, and he said Judith was going to keep digging until she proved someone sabotaged her party. The coffee in my cup was getting cold, but I couldn't drink it. My throat felt too tight. My phone rang that afternoon, and Raina's name showed up on the screen. Raina was Holt's younger sister and usually stayed out of family drama. I almost didn't answer because I knew what she was going to ask. Her voice sounded curious instead of mad when she asked if I had anything to do with the music incident. I told her no and tried to sound convincing. Raina was quiet for a second before saying she knew I had good reason after what Judith did at my wedding. She said if I did change the music, it was actually kind of brilliant. I stayed quiet, not sure what to say. Raina told me she couldn't say this stuff publicly, but she thought Judith needed someone to stand up to her. Then her voice got more serious. She warned me that Judith was on a mission to prove I sabotaged the party. She was calling every family member, asking questions, and building support to confront me directly. Raina said some relatives were taking Judith's side and saying I was being cruel. Others thought Judith deserved what happened after the horse stunt. The family was splitting into groups and picking sides. I asked Raina what I should do, and she said keep denying everything. She told me not to admit anything even if people pressured me. We hung up and I sat on my couch feeling sick. This was getting bigger than I planned. Over the next week, Holt became different at home. He was quiet and tense in a way I'd never seen before. He asked me 3 separate times if I was being completely honest about the party. Each time I said yes, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Our conversations got shorter and more careful. We talked about safe things like work and groceries, but avoided anything about his family. At night, we used to watch shows together on the couch, but now he stayed in his office longer. I started going to bed early to avoid the uncomfortable silence between us. On Thursday, he came home late from work and barely said hello. I made dinner, but he said he already ate. We sat in the living room on opposite ends of the couch looking at our phones. The space between us felt huge, even though we were only a few feet apart. I wanted to tell him the truth, but I was scared of what would happen. Friday night, I tried to talk to him about normal stuff, but his answers were short. He went to bed before me and was asleep when I came into the bedroom. I lay there in the dark, wondering how long we could keep living like this. Judith refused to come to a family dinner we planned for Sunday. Holt got a text from her saying she couldn't be around me until I admitted what I did and apologized. He showed me the message and I could see how hurt he was. His father Atticus called later that evening. His voice was gentle but firm when he said Judith was genuinely upset about the party incident. He suggested maybe I should apologize even if I didn't do anything wrong, just to keep peace in the family. I told him I wouldn't apologize for something I didn't do. Atticus sighed and said sometimes being right wasn't as important as being kind. I said I was tired of always being the one who had to give in to keep Judith happy. He was quiet for a long moment before saying he understood my frustration. Then he added that Judith was his wife and the mother of his children and he had to support her. I could hear the disappointment in his voice when we said goodbye. I sat holding my phone, feeling angry and alone. Everyone expected me to fix this by admitting something I kept denying. But if I admitted it, then I proved Judith right about me being vindictive and mean. 2 weeks after the party, I met Hazel for lunch downtown. She looked uncomfortable when she told me what she'd been hearing from people. Judith was telling extended family members and friends that I was unstable and couldn't handle her strong personality. She was using the party incident as proof that I was cruel and vindictive. Hazel said some of the family friends were believing Judith's version of events. They thought I was a young wife trying to push out the mother who raised Holt. Judith was painting herself as the victim of a daughter-in-law who wanted to cut her out of her son's life. I felt betrayed and angry listening to all this. Hazel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She said Judith was conveniently leaving out the part about riding a horse down the aisle at my wedding in a white dress. But people who weren't there didn't know that story as well. They only heard Judith's side about her birthday party getting ruined. I asked Hazel what I should do, and she said I needed to decide if winning this fight was worth losing my marriage. I went home that day feeling worse than before. My reputation was destroyed while Judith played the victim to anyone who would listen. Raina stopped responding to my texts as fast as she used to. When I invited her to lunch, she said she was busy with work. I could tell she was trying to stay neutral, but Judith was pulling her toward taking sides. Raina sent me a message saying her mom was putting pressure on her to publicly support her. She said she thought both the horse incident and the music revenge were equally ridiculous, but she couldn't say that to Judith. I understood, but it still hurt watching another person get pulled away from me. The family was splitting into camps and the middle ground was disappearing. People who tried to stay neutral were getting pushed to pick a side. I realized my revenge wasn't just between Judith and me anymore. It was creating divisions that spread through the whole family, affecting everyone. Cousins were arguing with each other. Holt's relatives were gossiping about me. Some family friends stopped inviting us to events because they didn't want the drama. I thought changing the music would make me feel better about the wedding, but instead it started a war that kept growing bigger. 3 weeks after the party, Holt came home from visiting his parents looking exhausted. He sat down on the couch and said we needed to have a serious talk about our marriage. My heart started racing as he told me he couldn't keep living in a house where his wife and mother were at war. Something had to change or he didn't know what would happen to us. He looked me straight in the eyes and asked point blank if I sabotaged the music at his mother's party. He said he needed the truth to figure out how to move forward. I saw real pain in his face that made me feel terrible. His eyes looked tired and sad in a way that scared me. I opened my mouth to deny it again, but the lie wouldn't come out. I sat there frozen, knowing this was the moment that would decide everything. I told him yes. I said I changed the music at his mother's party because she ruined my wedding and I wanted her to feel what that was like. Holt's face went through several changes in the space of a few seconds. First shock with his eyes getting wide and his mouth opening slightly. Then disappointment that made him look away from me toward the wall. Finally resignation as his shoulders dropped and he let out a long breath. He sat there quiet for what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. The silence made my heart beat faster and my hands start to sweat. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but tired. He said he understood why I did it, but wished I had talked to him first instead of going behind his back and making everything worse. I tried to explain that talking wouldn't have changed what Judith did to our wedding, but he cut me off. He said that wasn't the point. The point was we were supposed to be partners who handled problems together, not people who went off and did things that affected both of us without discussion. We talked for over 2 hours that night, sitting on opposite ends of the couch with too much space between us. Holt said we needed to set real boundaries with his mother about what behavior we would accept and what we wouldn't. He said we also needed to figure out how we handled conflicts as a couple, because clearly we weren't doing it right. I realized during that conversation that my revenge hadn't solved anything. Judith's horse stunt still happened and my wedding was still ruined by it. But now I had also ruined her party and damaged my marriage and created a family war that was spreading to everyone around us. I felt worse sitting there than I had felt watching Judith ride that horse down the aisle. At least on my wedding day, I had righteous anger to fuel me. Now I just felt tired and stupid and ashamed. A few days later, Hazel came over with coffee and pastries from the bakery we both liked. She sat down at my kitchen table and looked at me with the expression she got when she was about to say something I wouldn't want to hear. She started gently by asking how things were going with Holt and his family. I told her about the conversation where I admitted what I did and how Holt reacted. She nodded and ate some of her pastry before speaking again. She said she needed to tell me something as my friend, even though it might make me mad. She said when this whole thing started with the horse at my wedding, she was completely on my side and thought Judith was awful. She still thought the horse thing was ridiculous and selfish. But now she was worried about me because I seemed obsessed with getting back at Judith the same way Judith had been obsessed with stealing attention at my wedding. She said I was becoming just as focused on one-upping Judith as Judith was on making everything about herself. Her words stung because part of me knew she was right. She said she supported me but was concerned I was damaging my marriage and my own peace of mind by staying locked in this fight. She asked if winning against Judith was worth losing Holt or becoming the kind of person who sabotaged parties and lied about it. I wanted to argue with her but couldn't find the words. She was right, and I had been. So focused on getting even that, I didn't notice I was turning into someone just as petty as my mother-in-law. 2 weeks later, Holt said we needed to go to a family barbecue at his parents' house. I immediately said no, but he insisted. He said if we ever wanted to repair any of these relationships, we had to start somewhere, and this was as good a place as any. I knew he was right, even though the thought of facing Judith made my stomach hurt. The afternoon of the barbecue was tense from the moment we arrived. Atticus opened the door and gave us both awkward hugs that felt forced. Judith was in the backyard setting up food on a long table. She looked at me when we walked out, then looked away without saying hello. Other family members were there, including Holt's aunt and uncle and some cousins I had met a few times. Everyone seemed uncomfortable, like they knew about the drama and didn't want to be caught in the middle of it. I tried to make small talk with Holt's aunt, but our conversation felt stiff and weird. Judith kept busy with the food and avoided coming near me. I stayed on the opposite side of the yard from her. About an hour into the barbecue, Judith was talking to her sister about some charity event they were planning. She said something about how important it was to work with people you could trust and rely on. Then she looked directly at me while saying it. My face got hot and I felt anger rising in my chest. I couldn't stop myself from speaking. I said loudly enough for people nearby to hear that it was also important not to make other people's special events all about yourself. Judith's face turned red and she walked over to where I was standing. She said at least she didn't sneak around sabotaging things like a coward. I said at least I didn't ride a horse down someone's wedding aisle in a white dress like an attention-seeking nightmare. Within seconds, we were both yelling at each other in front of everyone. Judith brought up every complaint she had about me from the past year. She said I was cold and unfriendly and tried to exclude her from everything. I brought up every rude comment she had made about my career and my choices, and how she told Holt he could do better than me. She said I was jealous of her relationship with her son. I said she was jealous that Holt chose me over her. Holt tried to get between us with his hands raised, asking us both to calm down. Judith called me jealous again, and I called her an attention-seeking nightmare for the second time. That's when Holt physically stepped in front of me and turned to face his mother. Atticus finally shouted from across the yard that we were both acting like children. He said we were ruining family events just like we were accusing each other of doing. He looked angrier than I had ever seen him. Several family members started gathering their things to leave. Holt's aunt said something about needing to get home even though it was only 4 p.m. Within 20 minutes, half the people at the barbecue had left with various excuses. The ones who stayed looked miserable and uncomfortable. Judith went inside the house and didn't come back out. I sat on a lawn chair feeling shaky and sick to my stomach. Holt didn't talk to me. When we finally left an hour later, he walked to the car ahead of me. The drive home was completely silent. I cried quietly, looking out the passenger window while Holt kept his eyes on the road. When we got home, I went straight to the bedroom and he stayed in the living room. We didn't speak to each other the rest of the night. 2 days later, I got an email from Clara Hensley, who I had met a few times at family events. She said Judith had asked her to reach out because the family situation was getting out of control. Clara suggested we meet for coffee to talk. I almost deleted the email, but something made me agree. We met at a cafe near my apartment the next afternoon. Clara ordered us both lattes and sat across from me looking kind but serious. She said Judith was her closest friend, and she loved her, but she also knew Judith could be difficult. She said she wanted to help mediate because this situation was tearing the family apart. Then Clara told me things about Judith I hadn't known before. She said Judith had always struggled with feeling invisible and unimportant, especially as she got older. She said Judith watched her friends' children get married and have babies, and she felt left behind and less relevant. Clara explained that the horse stunt at my wedding was Judith's misguided attempt to feel special and included in an important moment. She admitted the execution was completely inappropriate and selfish, and that Judith should have respected my plans. But she said it came from a place of insecurity, not from wanting to deliberately hurt me. I sat there processing this information. Part of me wanted to reject it and stay angry. But another part of me understood that hurt people sometimes hurt other people. Clara wasn't excusing what Judith did. She was just explaining it. She said Judith knew she messed up but didn't know how to fix it without losing face. I told Clara I would think about what she said. Over the next week, I started noticing consequences of the ongoing drama in my own life. A friend from work mentioned she had heard I was difficult and vindictive from someone in Holt's family. I felt my face get hot with embarrassment and anger. My reputation was damaged by this conflict. Another couple we were friends with stopped inviting us to their dinner parties. When I asked why, they said they didn't want to deal with family drama. I realized that my revenge against Judith hadn't just hurt her. It was affecting how people saw me and whether they wanted to be around me. Some of our mutual friends were distancing themselves to avoid getting pulled into the mess. I felt ashamed because I had always thought of myself as a reasonable person who handled problems maturely. Now people were hearing stories about me sabotaging parties and having screaming matches at barbecues. My social standing was taking damage, and it was my own fault. I felt defensive, wanting to explain my side to everyone, but also ashamed that there was a side to explain at all. That weekend, Holt told me he wanted to talk again. We sat at the kitchen table where we had so many difficult conversations lately. He looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. He said he had been thinking a lot about our marriage and where we were headed. He said he loved me but couldn't continue living with this level of family conflict and stress. The constant tension was affecting his work and his health and his happiness. He said he thought we should consider marriage counseling because he was exhausted from being caught in the middle and didn't know how to fix this situation on his own. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said if we couldn't find a way forward together, he wasn't sure what would happen to us. He didn't say the word divorce, but it hung in the air between us anyway. I felt panic rising in my chest. I realized I might actually lose my marriage over a petty revenge scheme that had accomplished nothing except making everyone miserable. I told him I would do counseling or whatever else he thought we needed. He nodded but didn't look relieved. He just looked tired. I spent the next 2 days thinking about everything that had happened. I thought about my wedding and Judith's horse and my revenge and the barbecue fight. I thought about Hazel's warning and Clara's explanation and Holt's exhausted face. I realized I had a choice. I could keep fighting Judith and probably lose my marriage in the process. Or I could try to find some way to move forward even though it felt like swallowing glass. I opened my laptop and started writing an email to Judith. I deleted it and started over 3 times. I finally settled on something that acknowledged the music incident was wrong without quite apologizing. I said we were both guilty of making family events about our conflict, instead of about the people those events were supposed to celebrate. I suggested we try to move forward for Holt's sake, and for the sake of the family, even if we were never going to be close friends. I read it over 5 times, checking every word. My hands were shaking when I hit send. I felt like I was giving up or admitting defeat, but I also felt like it was the only option left that didn't end with me losing everything. 3 days passed with no response. I checked my email constantly, wondering if Judith had even read it. Then on the 4th day, her reply appeared in my inbox. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. The email was surprisingly measured compared to what I expected. Judith acknowledged that the horse incident was inappropriate, and that she should have respected my wedding plans. She didn't apologize outright, but admitted she sometimes got carried away seeking attention and recognition. She said she understood why I was angry, even though she wished I had handled it differently. She agreed to try to coexist peacefully for Holt's sake. Her tone made it clear she was doing this for her son rather than for me. But honestly, that was fine because I felt exactly the same way. We weren't doing this because we liked each other or wanted to be friends. We were doing it because we both loved Holt and didn't want to keep hurting him. The following week, Holt arranged for the 4 of us to meet with a family therapist Clara had recommended. Walking into that office felt like walking into a courtroom. The therapist was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a calm expression. She had us all sit in a circle and explained that her role was to help us communicate better and establish boundaries everyone could agree on. The session was uncomfortable with long silences and careful word choices, but it was also productive in ways I didn't expect. The therapist helped us talk about specific behaviors that needed to change. Judith agreed not to insert herself into our major life events without being invited. I agreed not to retaliate when she overstepped instead of talking to Holt first. We established a trial period of limited contact with structured family gatherings where both of us committed to civil behavior. Having a neutral third party there made the agreements feel more real and binding. Nobody was happy when we left, but we all seemed less angry. Atticus looked relieved. Holt looked hopeful for the first time in weeks. Judith and I didn't hug or even really look at each other. But we had taken a first step towards something that might eventually become peace. Over the next month, Holt and I sat down every few nights to talk about his mother and what we wanted our marriage to look like. We picked a regular time after dinner when we were both calm and not already fighting about something. He started bringing up boundary issues with Judith before they turned into problems, calling her when she suggested dropping by unannounced instead of just letting her show up. I made myself tell him when something his mother said bothered me instead of planning revenge in secret. Our relationship felt different in ways I hadn't expected. We were actually dealing with problems instead of avoiding them or letting them explode. But every time Judith's name came up in conversation, I still felt my shoulders tense. Holt noticed it too, the way his voice got careful when he mentioned his mother. The hurt from everything that happened was still there under the surface. We were building something stronger, but the foundation had cracks we both knew about. 6 weeks later, we went to a family dinner at Atticus and Judith's house. I spent the drive over reminding myself to stay calm and let things go. Judith made a comment during the meal about how my career kept me so busy that Holt probably felt neglected at home. Normally, I would have snapped back or made a sharp comment about mothers who couldn't let their sons grow up. Instead, I took a breath and focused on cutting my food. Holt jumped in smoothly and changed the subject to a project he was working on at his job. Judith looked surprised but didn't push it further. Later, I was helping clear dishes and organizing some family photos that were scattered on the counter. Judith came over and actually said I had a good eye for arranging things. It wasn't a big compliment, but it was real. We had a brief conversation about photography that felt almost normal. The moment was weird and uncomfortable because we were both being careful with our words, but it was progress. We were trying. I could tell she was still wary of me, and I definitely felt the same about her. That probably wasn't going to change. But we were in the same room being civil, and that was something. Looking back now, I can see that both the horse incident and my revenge were signs of bigger problems in how our family worked. The satisfaction I felt watching Judith's entrance get ruined at her party lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then came months of stress and fighting and almost losing Holt. I learned that getting even doesn't actually make you feel better. It just creates new problems and makes everything worse. Sometimes the high road exists for good reasons, even when it feels completely unfair. I wanted to hurt Judith the way she hurt me, but all I did was hurt myself and my marriage. The revenge felt good in the moment, but it cost me so much more than it was worth. Judith and I will never be close. There's still awkwardness at family events and probably always will be. But we've reached a workable peace where we're polite and keep our distance from each other. Holt seems relieved that he can have both his wife and his mother in the same room without warfare breaking out. Honestly, that's enough for now. I still think her horse stunt was ridiculous and selfish. She probably still thinks my music revenge was petty and mean. But we've agreed to stop trying to one-up each other and just focus on coexisting. Life isn't perfect or completely resolved. It's manageable, though. Sometimes that's the best you can hope for with difficult family dynamics.